Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. If you are following this meeting, this is the Standards Committee meeting on Tuesday, the 20th of April 2021. I'm pleased that you've been able to join us this evening, and I will make one or two introductions. I am Councillor Nigel Brooks. I am the Vice Chairman of Standards and are substituting for our Chairman this evening, who unfortunately is unwell, and that is Councillor Stephen Barron. I have an advice of one other member who cannot join us. Louise, could you just confirm?
Yeah, just to read through the conduct for tonight's meeting. The Standards Committee is being recorded by Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone present follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak to when invited by the chairman. Always turn on your video function when invited to speak. State your name before you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Mute your microphone when you are not talking. If you would like to speak on an item, please do so by utilising the raise hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. The messaging bar should not be used unless you are raising a point of order or providing the wording for an amendment. If at any point you would like to speak again, please use the raise hand feature again, and if necessary, the chairman will ask each member in turn how they wish to vote. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration. Thank you.
And, apologies, Louise?
Yeah, apologies have been received from Councillor Barron and Councillor Rigby.
Thank you very much. And in that respect, we have one substitute member.
Yes, Councillor Ball is substituting for Councillor Rigby this evening.
Thank you very much. We're also joined by independent members of the Standards Committee, and they will be asked to speak as may be necessary during the meeting. I understand that there have been several other members who've asked to join the meeting, and I understand that they'll be following the meeting, but as this committee will not be asking them to speak, I trust that you'll be able to follow as we run through the agenda this evening. Are there any declarations of interest, members? No, I'm seeing no show. Thank you. The next point on our agenda is under paragraph 4, and that is confirmation of the minutes of our meeting, which was held on 12th of January 2021. Can I have confirmation that you accept those minutes as a true record of our meeting?
Agreed.
Agreed, Chair.
Thank you. I see no. Thank you. I see no votes or indications otherwise, so we will accept the minutes of that meeting. Item 5 is public issues. Do we have any public questions or statements or petitions to this committee this evening? Louise?
No public issues have been received, Chairman.
Thank you very much. We swiftly move then on to item 6 on our agenda, which is an important aspect of this committee, which is the consideration of the Local Government Association Model Code of Conduct for Councillors. And this is an important matter for this committee and subsequently for full council. But I'm going to ask our monitoring officer, Susan Zeiss, to actually introduce this and to take us through the new model code. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. So the model code, as has been indicated, was developed by the Local Government Association in concert with all the councils across England, and they participated in a number of workshops and drafting sessions to the point where this new code was developed from scratch. There'd long been an aspiration to develop a unified code for all the councils in England, but through various reasons it hadn't come to fruition until now. It is, however, a template, so local councils can amend it and review it as and when. But in conversations with my counterpart monitoring officer at Dorset Council, and also because he's the monitoring officer for the Combined Fire Authority, and in other conversations that Richard Jones, our head of democratic services, has had with the various parishes in the BCP area, we feel it's a good idea for all of us to have the same model code. It helps with consistency, it helps with keeping a certain level of standards and so on across a wider area than just our own. So this code applies from the minute councillors sign their declaration of acceptance of office, or when they attend their first meeting in capacity as a councillor. And it applies when, I'll quote, "Your actions would give the impression to a reasonable member of the public with knowledge of all the facts that you are acting as a councillor." And this includes on social media. So the Code of Conduct has some principal requirements. They include the duty to promote and maintain a high standard of conduct. Every council must adopt a code. The code must contain appropriate provisions for disclosure of interests. The code must be consistent with the 7 principles of public life, commonly known as the Nolan principles. And it must include arrangements for investigation and decisions on alleged breaches of the code. But I think the main thing that members will note with this code is it has a different style and a different focus. It's written in the first person, almost as though it's addressing councillors in a more personal way, which was designed specifically to encourage engagement from members. So it speaks directly to members in the way that it aims to assist you as councillors to model the behaviour that's expected of you, to provide checks and balances, and also to protect you and to maintain public confidence in the role of a councillor. The LGA also encourages the use of support training and mediation prior to actions being taken under the code, which I think is going to be enormously helpful to all of us. Of course, it's founded, as I said, in the 7 principles of public life, and they are set out in a new and different way as well, in that with each one of those there are examples given. This will be really helpful because councillors will be able to possibly find certain ways to illustrate why that particular Nolan principle is important, or why that particular area of the code should not be transgressed. There is a small downside though, however, in that the minute you write a list, there's bound to be something that falls outside of that list. But nevertheless, I do believe that having those examples will be extremely useful to councillors in interpreting the code and make it more accessible for everybody. In parallel, almost alongside this, the Committee for Standards in Public Life produced a report which made several recommendations to government and several recommendations to councils on how they might improve their codes. Some of the recommendations made involve the making of primary legislation, which government hasn't responded to yet. But nevertheless, this code also includes the 15 recommendations that were made by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. And every council is encouraged to incorporate those into their codes, which is being done automatically if you adopt this particular code, except for those obviously which require primary legislation. And we have been asked by the committee to send them a regular report on whether or not we are adopting and taking into account those recommendations that they have made. There are still no meaningful sanctions or actions for potential breaches of the code. Those recommended by the Committee for Standards in Public Life do require, as I said, primary legislation, so they haven't come into being yet. For example, suspension or the keeping back of allowances and so on, those haven't come into force yet. But the committee has made these recommendations to central government and we await their response. We're also planning to make available some training to all councillors, possibly after the election, in the code, because even for those who have been councillors for a long time, this code has a slightly different style. It will have all the same principles and components, but I think it would be worthwhile to run through training. It's not a long code. It's a code that's written in a very straightforward and easily accessible way. So I think some engaging training where there's an opportunity to ask questions and for us as officers to learn alongside you as councillors this new code, I think would be really welcome. I think that comes to the end of my summary, unless anyone has any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan. That's a very succinct coverage of what is a very important step change in the code of practice for not only this council, but other councils throughout the country, as well as other authorities, as you mentioned, fire authorities or other bodies that are adopting the code of practice. Members, do you have any questions or points? I think Marcus at one stage wants to raise a point. Thank you, Marcus.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, many other local authorities have looked at this model code, because I think it came out at the end of last year, and have approved it all the way through to their various full councils. So I think up and down the country, hundreds of hours have been spent on tweaking and modifying this model code that we've got here in front of us. I've done a bit of research on this, and linking in with that, the only point I would like to make, and I'm actually going to propose one minor amendment. It's an addition of one word. That would be to page 24 of our agenda, in terms of anybody who wants to look it up, and particularly paragraph 8b. This is on the declarations of interests. And for the people who don't have that in front of you, I will actually just read out paragraph 8 very quickly. Paragraph 8, where a matter arises at a meeting which affects A, your own financial interest or well-being, or B, a financial interest or well-being of a friend, relative or close associate, or C, a body included in those you need to declare under disclosable pecuniary interests, you must disclose the interest. Now, I consider B, if left unqualified, would place an unreasonable and unfair obligation on councils beyond the legal requirements of the Localism Act. Having an obligation to declare interests of friends, relatives or close associates which are not known would be somewhat vague and lacks a reasonable framework for any councillor to conduct themselves within. Also, a friend, relative or close associate is not sufficiently defined in the model code. It's not clear. Indeed, it did jog my memory in terms of a very famous quote some of you may have heard of, and I'm going to read it out. Donald Rumsfeld, he was the Secretary of State of Defense in the USA. He said, reports that say there is something that hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because we know there are known knowns. There are things we know that we know. We also know there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. And we've got a situation here where, as worded at the moment, somebody could be criticised under the code because they didn't know that, let's say, the next door neighbour had a financial interest in something that they voted on. So a qualification on this declaration is required, and I would suggest the insertion of the word known before the word financial is needed. This would provide greater certainty and comfort for all. Now, other councils have actually done this. Leeds City Council last month, the second largest authority in the country, has done it. And I'm not quite sure whether Dorset Council has picked up on this, but this vague wording needs to be improved upon by the insertion of the word known. So in proposing the adoption of this code and a recommendation to go to full council, I would like to propose it on the basis that the word known is inserted. Now, I've got that in the document, which I can post in the chat bar, but I think it's such a simple amendment, I don't think it needs to go into the chat bar. But if you've got a biro handy, you could pencil it in before the word financial. And I think hopefully I've got a seconder for that proposal. Firstly, to recommend the code, but with the insertion of the word known. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcus. I think that's a very good point, because it's a very wide clause in terms of what one would have otherwise had to investigate rather than actually being known. So I think that's a very good observation. Thank you. Can I
second that,
have a seconder, please?
I'm happy to second that, Chair.
Thank you very much. Can I now go to raised after Marcus?
Is the council staff going to run along similar values to what we're doing here tonight? Because this seems quite complicated, and I just wonder how close we're going to run alongside the council employees, and how close we're going to run along the 7 principles of public life, the Nolan things. How close we're running to those 2 items.
Could Richard or Susan enlighten us?
I can have a word on that, Chair. So the Nolan principles are applicable to both officers and members, and irrespective of how the code is drafted, one is required in legislation to run really closely, to use your turn of phrase, to the Nolan principles and have them at the forefront of your mind in everything that you do. But what isn't included in this code, because it sits separately in the Constitution, is the member officer protocol. And that is something that's in the process of being reviewed as part of the work that's been undertaken by the Constitution Review Working Group. So we haven't got to that part of the review at the moment. We've done can't remember the word now, and we're about to go on to the delegations, and the code of conduct comes at the end of the Constitution. So we will get to that probably in around July time. But if members have any specific suggestions they want to make, I would suggest we put those through the chairman of the Constitution Review Working Group, Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Susan. Can I then assume that there is no impediment with this? If it is approved this evening, the code of practice can go forward to the next full council meeting, and anything then that is being dealt with in terms of officers will actually be following on in its normal course.
Yes, indeed. And I should have said it will be adjusted and aligned with this new model code.
Thank you very much. Councillor Anne Stribley, please.
Sorry, unmuted. Thank you, Chairman. I thought we should be talking to this amendment that Councillor Andrews has put forward. It seems to be absolute common sense, because you can't know. And if you are aware of something, then of course you declare it. If you're totally unaware, then how can you declare it? So I'm very happy to support the amendment. And I'll comment on other things when we get to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Andy Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, like the others, I'm happy to support Councillor Andrews' amendment. I wonder if I could ask Susan a question about the training she mentioned earlier, or did you want to leave that till a little bit later?
No, let's deal with it progressively. Susan.
Yeah, thanks.
Yes. Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Jones, we are preparing a programme of training for all members post-election. It's something I've been putting together with Democratic Services for some time now. It will depend on capacity and so on, but I think training on the code, well, not training really, because it's more of an exploration between us both on the code and questions and so on around it, will be an essential part of that training. And we will be letting members know and canvassing for available dates sometime soon after the 6th of May. Did you have another? Did you want to know more about what form it would take, or?
Yes, please, if I may, Chair. Yeah, I was just wondering whether the actual training on the code is going to be an overview of the code itself, or whether it's going to be broken down into different areas. The only reason I asked this, because I think it was either the last meeting or the one before that, we talked about training around social media, and bearing in mind, obviously, the amount of time that this panel's taken dealing with issues around social media over the last year or so, particularly. I just wondered whether there's going to be any training around that, and if so, how is it going to be structured? And could we possibly use some examples of what is acceptable and what isn't? Because clearly, with some members, there's a grey area there. So I think if we could sort of build some actual examples into that type of training, that would be really helpful. But as I say, I don't know what you've got planned around the training overview. But if we could look at specific areas, particularly social media, with some set examples around sort of key components of the code, that'd be really good.
Through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor Jones, we haven't designed this training, down to the actual words yet. So there is an opportunity for this input to be taken into account, and I think that might be useful. You'll remember we did training on social media not that long ago, but it wouldn't hurt to bring that to the forefront again, and absolutely more than happy to take that. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Andy Jones, and Susan. I think you have you've spotted what is the key thing. I think for many members is to understand where the boundaries lie in the use of social media. And as you say, we have in the past had to deal with quite a few cases where social media has been quite an issue. So thank you for raising that, Councillor. Councillor Marcus Andrews, please.
Yeah, it was just a quick question to Susan Zeiss on my amendment. I did mention it to her last week and Richard, and I know in her preamble she was talking about that we want to be similar or identical to Dorset and the Fire Authority and et cetera, et cetera. I don't know whether she had a chance to talk to her counterpart at Dorset Council on this. I know she's happy with the insertion of the word known, but whether she was able to catch up with Dorset Council, whether they spotted it or not.
Again, Chairman, thank you. Unfortunately, no, time didn't allow. I did make an attempt, but the availability didn't coincide. I don't think that an amendment of this kind will have any significant impact, because I will just point it out to my counterpart so that it is known. Because in fact, the basis for this provision lies in legislation. So we would always want to be going back to the requirements of the legislation, and the code is really a summary or a brief explanation of that. So, you know, the legislation would be more definitive about what is required in the case of making declarations. But thank you. I will make sure that they are aware of our amendment if it gets passed.
Thank you, Susan. I think in many respects, you know, the model code that's come forward has gone through a lot of work with the Local Government Association, a lot of consultation, a lot of thought has gone into the issues that were missing in so many codes of conduct. And in a sense, I guess it must be a sort of a dynamic situation as other matters come forward. Then I hope we will see some leadership from the Local Government Association in actually spotting things. Because we've obviously seen things as this committee has worked through, and to actually have that sort of momentum that we can actually respond to changing circumstances will be extremely helpful. Councillor Anne Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to ask, can we vote on this amendment before we move on to other issues?
Yes, apologies. So I've had a proposal from Councillor Marcus Andrews. I've had it seconded as an amendment. Are you happy, members, to support the proposal? Thank you.
Agreed.
Yes.
Agreed. Yes. Thank you. So coming back to you, Councillor Anne Stribley, over to you, please.
No, that was it, Chairman. I didn't want that issue to get confused with other matters which have been raised. Thank you. No,
thank you. Is there any other debate around the proposed model code of conduct?
Well, apart from Mr. Chairman, perhaps we should have a formal, as amended, vote that we recommend it to full council on the, I think, the 6th of June from this committee, which you know, Steve or yourself will be talking to. Thank you. So I would so propose.
Yes, thank you, Marcus. Well, on that basis, if you are happy, members, we will actually take it to full council at its next meeting and present it to them with that amendment, and we'll ask for their approval to the new code, which will then effectively be in place straight away.
Agreed.
Agreed. Thank you. Thank you for your support on that. I think this is a major step forward for this committee to actually operate in a really productive way. So we now move on to item 7 on the agenda. I'm using two mouses here, beg your pardon, which is a review of the Code of Conduct complaints that we've received since the last meeting. And you would have seen it on the agenda. There is a log of the cases that we have been dealing with. And I'm going to ask the monitoring officer, Susan Zeiss, to please review that for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And I'm going to defer to my colleague, Mr. Jones, who I understand. Is that correct, Richard? I don't want to put you on the spot if that's not correct.
I can quickly introduce it, Susan. Sorry, apologies. I thought you were going to do that, but no,
I beg your pardon. My mistake. Then you carry on, Richard. Thank you.
Okay, Chairman, members, good evening. This is your standard report that you receive at each meeting with an update on the progress of complaints. Clearly, complaints are considered by the chairman in the current process, or the old process, by the chairman in consultation and the independent persons. And the table in the report gives an update of those of the status of those complaints. Those items that were previously shown as closed on your previous report have been removed. Where complaints have since been closed, they are now shown as closed on this report, and complaints that are still pending or new complaints are shown as pending. You will notice there's quite a few new complaints that have been added that you haven't yet received, but they are currently going through the initial assessment stage. And again, just to remind members that the procedure or the process for initial assessment is now incorporates a step for the monitoring officer to undertake some early an early opportunity to review complaints before it necessarily goes through to the chairman. And again, the monitoring officer can perhaps update on that particular issue if necessary. So this is really for information. It's a status report, but I think what's important is that probably at your next meeting, we will bring forward to you an annual report on the complaints. So that is again one of the recommendations on the previous item from the standards in public life, that you receive an annual report that will include perhaps some data, some statistics around the type of complaint, the nature of those complaints, and the conclusions on those particular issues. So it's really just for information, Chairman, but again, happy to answer any questions or deal with any issues you may have to raise.
Thank you, Richard. As members will see, there are quite a few cases that we have pending coming forward, and for those who are joining the meeting and not members, we hold informal meetings quite regularly because they do take some time to understand all the facts, all the evidence, and to understand the submissions from a complainant and a response. So please be aware that it does take time to actually progress and work through these, because there is a lot of cases here, as you'll see, currently pending, which I believe are coming quite recently, and you'll actually see more on these at future meetings when we do then give, as Richard said, an annual report on the cases we're dealing with, but also then the change in status from being pending, active, or in fact closed. Are there any comments from members or points that you wish to make, please? Thank you, Councillor Marcus Andrews.
Yeah, it's just a question, really. I think I can probably guess the answer. Obviously, we've got several pending complaints, and if full council ratifies our recommendation to adopt the new code, obviously from that day on, following day really, I suppose, obviously the new code comes in, upon which members will be judged and adjudicated upon. What happens to the still pending complaints which haven't been decided upon at that time? I would imagine probably the members should be judged under the old code as opposed to the new code, but if perhaps one of the officers could clarify that, please.
Yes, thank you, Marcus. Susan.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Andrews. They would be, but I do think that these codes are not too dissimilar in that they run alongside the legislation, or they bring into being the legislation, and they also incorporate those 7 principles of public life. So while there may be differences in style, and there may be some areas where the new code has tightened things up slightly, yes, those old complaints would definitely be dealt with under the old code, but there wouldn't be too much of a difference between the two. The standard that councillors are being held to is fundamentally the same.
Thank you. Do I see any other hands of comments, please? Yes, thank you. Sorry, I can't see from my screen, but I see a hand. Could you please introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. Right.
Oh.
I just find some of our results are not too progressive. We seem to find ourselves in a situation where we can't really complete the exercise because the councillors or other people don't accept the first part of the argument and then don't accept the second part. So sometimes I feel that it's never anything, which is definitely we were done something as a punishment or an advisory thing, we're getting flat when it comes to us, and we don't be able to then progress it because there's some reason why. There's always a reason why some A is not going to apologise to B, and C and D. That to me is completely inconclusive. So at times I do wonder why we come along to try and solve these matters when we don't get the cooperation of the members. And I really do feel that we've got to press this home at council, that, you know, if we are to do this job to a reasonable standard, we need people's cooperation, and they can't avoid the case by not ignoring or just going on arguing. You know, that's what I find about it all. I just find it sometimes, well, what do we waste our time on that one for? Because nobody's agreed it's a good way forward, and particularly from the people we're talking about.
Thank you, Derek. I think the sentiment with many members is the same. Councillor Simon Ball, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a quick question. I'm having a look at the outstanding cases or complaints. The longest standing one seems to be BCP 021. Is there any indication as to how long that's been out in the process? What is, I know you try and do them as expediently as possible, but is there any way of knowing whether that's been in the system for 3 weeks or 3 months or 2 years, you know, and what's the delay with the older ones, the 2.1 and the 2.2?
Yes, thank you. Can I ask Richard to comment, please?
Thank you, Chairman. I wouldn't wish to go into the detail of the nature of the complaint. Clearly, we don't disclose some of those items. That one has been pending. I'll be honest, I'm off the top of my head, many months. So it was before Christmas, possibly in it's at least 6 months, I would say, on that one, I think is in truth. But I can't go into the detail of that particular detail. But we are receiving updates on that particular issue back through the panel on a regular basis for the members of the committee.
Thank you, Richard. I think it's fair to say that the cases can be very involved and need a lot of due diligence to actually get to the nub of the issues and to consider responses to an exchange of information when these cases come forward. Unfortunately, it does take some time, Simon, to go through, which we do find frustrating. You know, as Councillor Borthwick said, you know, we would like to progress with things, but sometimes we have to really actually, you know, go into fine detail to actually be clear that we are, as a committee, taking the right decision, which can be, you know, let's be frank, frustrating. Councillor Andy Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, also, if any cases do get referred to full council, what level of detail is actually going to be shown in terms of the report, bearing in mind, obviously, what's just been said about the sensitive nature of some of these issues?
Well, first of all, there has been no decision of matters being referred to full council, but that could be an outcome of a particular case, but they would be specific cases, so one cannot actually comment on them at the present time. Susan, do you want to add to anything from Andy Jones?
I can just say, thank you, Chairman. I can just say, Councillor Jones, that it depends largely on what stage the complaint is at and what the outcome has been. So, for example, if the complaint has gone to an independent investigation and there is a formal report, that formal report will be reported to council. So there will be a certain amount of specificity. If there is an informal resolution made, or if there is a circumstance where the committee has not been able to manage to resolve the matter informally, then I think the report will probably contain just the matter-of-fact details of that, you know, the fact that there has been no resolution. And that's the level of detail that there will be in the report. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Susan. No, I trust, Andy Jones, you get a flavour of the problem sometimes that actually has then to be referred to an independent person to actually validate the conclusions either of the committee or that things we may have been missed are actually fully understood and reported upon. But I think that's a matter for the future at the present time, but thank you for raising it. Are there any other people, members who would like to comment, please? No? You seem fairly content at the moment. So if there is no other business or no other points that you wish to raise at the present time, thank you for our independent members. I apologise I didn't give you personal introductions, from Ian Stribley to, I can't see you on the screen at the moment, but Jonathan Story is also here as one of our independent assessors as well, who work very closely with the committee at the informal meetings to go through cases and to give us guidance and to give interpretations on matter of law, which we really appreciate for some very complex cases that we have to consider. I'm going to ask Ian Stribley, who is one of our independent members or advisors, please, to comment. Thank you.
It's only a quickie, Chairman. Oh, sorry. Yes, it's only a quickie, Chairman. Paul Cashmore is the third independent person, of course.
Thank you. Apologies. He appeared and then disappeared from my screen, so I was trying to catch up with where we were on the share participants, but thank you. So if there's nothing further ado, thank you, members, for attending this meeting. Thank you for your support at very short notice. I've had to step in for Councillor Steve Barron, and we look forward to the next full standards meeting. But I trust before then we will have the opportunity to bring the new Code of Conduct to full council and answer any queries from other members as they are able to understand what the intent and what the opportunity is to improve the way that this committee actually has to operate with its members as well. So thank you very much for joining us this evening, and I look forward to seeing you again shortly. Good night.